They say never meet your heroes. For Dave Chappelle, meeting Jim Carrey turned out to be exactly that kind of lesson. Chappelle's recent comments about Carrey went viral online, not because they were funny, but because they were surprisingly candid about what Carrey was really like behind scenes. It's a side of the story most people haven't heard before, and it reshapes how we think about their relationship. Ask almost anyone to name one of the most talented comedic actors alive, and the answer comes quickly: Jim Carrey. It isn't just that he was funny, it's how he did it. The exaggerated faces, the rubbery movement, the sense that his whole body became the joke before he ever spoke a word. It wasn't ordinary comedy. It was physical, unpredictable, and it changed what people expected humor to look like. But behind that dazzling public image is a very different story. While audiences saw someone electric and larger than life, people who worked with him off camera didn't always come away with the same impression. Dave Chappelle was one of those people. To understand that contrast, you have to go back to the beginning, long before the fame and the reputation, to a version of Jim Carrey that looked nothing like the star the world would come to know. James Eugene Carrey was born in Newmarket, Ontario, into a working-class family built on routine and quiet ambition. His mother, Kathleen, stayed home, while his father, Percy, moved between music and accounting to keep the household afloat. It was a Catholic upbringing with 3 older siblings and a mix of Irish, Scottish, and French-Canadian heritage. Even within that ordinary setting, something about young Jim stood out. By age 8, he was already experimenting in front of the mirror, stretching his face into new expressions just to see what worked. By 10, he'd written a letter to Carol Burnett, convinced he'd already mastered impressions and deserved a spot on her show. Getting any kind of reply back, even a generic one, was enough to make the dream feel real. While his imagination grew, his family's finances were falling apart. They moved from Scarborough to Burlington chasing stability, but it slipped away anyway. At one point, they lost their home entirely and were forced to live out of a Volkswagen van, with teenage Jim and his brother spending months sleeping in a tent at a park along Lake Ontario. That period left a lasting mark. When his father eventually found work at a tire factory back in Scarborough, the family could move into a nearby house, but only if Jim and his brother helped earn it, working overnight shifts as janitors and security guards through exhausting 8-hour nights. Even in the middle of that grind, comedy kept pulling him back. After another move, he enrolled at Agincourt Collegiate Institute, but by 16 he dropped out entirely to perform stand-up in downtown Toronto while still working factory jobs on the side. He later admitted that if things had gone differently, he could easily have ended up working in a steel mill in Hamilton, staring out the same factories he once thought held the best jobs anyone could hope for. But that wasn't the path he took. He kept moving forward, carrying the struggle and the pressure with him. And somewhere along the way, the Jim Carrey the world would eventually celebrate began to take shape. When 15-year-old Jim Carrey stepped on stage for the first time in 1977, his father helped him put the act together and drove him to a small Toronto comedy club called Yuck Yucks, tucked into a community center basement. It wasn't for giving room, and it wasn't built for someone still finding his voice. Everything about that first set felt mismatched. From the polyester leisure suit his mother picked out, to the safe, old-fashioned impressions he brought with him. The crowd wanted something sharper and more adult, and the gap between what Carrey offered and what they expected became impossible to ignore. The set collapsed, and doubt crept in, the lingering kind that made him question whether comedy was really his path. That moment didn't happen in isolation. His family was still struggling financially, and for a while, stepping back from performing seemed more practical than pushing forward. But things slowly improved. The family moved into a new home in Jackson's Point, and with a bit more stability, Carrey returned to the stage. By 1979, he was sharper and more confident, and when he landed a paid 20-minute set in Scarborough for $20 Canadian, it felt like proof that something was finally working. He went back to the same Yuck Yuck stage that had humbled him 2 years earlier, this time relocated to Yorkville, and this time it worked. Open mic nights turned into paid sets, and paid sets turned into a growing reputation. By 17, people were starting to notice him. That momentum pushed him toward bigger goals, including a shot at Saturday Night Live for the 1980 to 81 season. It didn't pan out. The show went another direction. So Carrey took smaller gigs, including local overnight voice work, to stay busy. In early 1981, at 19, he opened for the rock band Gatto and Barry, but the crowd wasn't there for comedy and booed him off stage. He didn't return for the second show, yet just 2 weeks later, a glowing review of his Yuck Yucks performance appeared in the Toronto Star, declaring that a real star was emerging. Suddenly, demand grew across Canada. In April 1981, he appeared on An Evening at the Improv, and that same year landed his first acting role in a TV film playing a struggling impressionist, a role that mirrored his own life more than it seemed. Rodney Dangerfield later spotted his talent and brought him along as an opening act on tour, exposing Carrey to new audiences beyond Canada. By the end of 1981, there was talk of a Tonight Show appearance, and he auditioned in 1982, but was told to keep refining his act instead. He went back to work, and that same year performed 2 sold-out shows at Toronto's Massey Hall, proof that his career was moving in the right direction. When it all finally broke open in the 1990s, it happened fast. Films like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber turned him into one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Batman Forever, The Cable Guy, and Liar Liar followed, cementing that his manic energy wasn't a passing trend. It was a genuine force in Hollywood. Then he shifted gears with The Truman Show and Man on the Moon, earning serious critical praise, and proving his range went far beyond comedy. He balanced blockbuster hits like How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Bruce Almighty with quieter, more introspective work, culminating in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a performance that felt more restrained and left a lasting impression. That same year, he was inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame, a full-circle moment tying his success back to where it all began. In the years since, he's kept reinventing himself, voicing Horton Hears a Who, taking on darker material in I Love You, Philip Morris, returning to Dumb and Dumber, and starring the TV series Kidding, where the line between character and personal unraveling felt almost too real. He later stepped into political satire on SNL and played Dr. Robotnik in the Sonic the Hedgehog films, bringing that same unpredictable energy to a new generation. At one point, he spoke about stepping away from acting altogether, sounding both exhausted and fulfilled. But that didn't last, and by 2024 he was back in a Robotnik role once again. Behind the comedy and the fame, Carrey's personal life has followed a very different, more turbulent pattern. It began in 1993, right as his career was taking off, when his 6-year marriage to Melissa Womer ended. She had supported him through the lean years before fame, and by her account, the marriage seemed fine right up until he left to film Ace Ventura, a turning point after which everything changed. Around that time, he met his Dumb and Dumber co-star Lauren Holly during auditions, which fueled suspicions of infidelity, though Holly later insisted the marriage was effectively over before their relationship began. Womer, for a part, described it less as an affair and more as Carrey stepping into a new version of himself, one who wanted success without old attachments. That new chapter didn't last either. Carrey married Holly in 1996, but the marriage collapsed within a year, with divorce filed by mid-1997. Holly later described relentless paparazzi intrusion, photographers trespassing on their property, and even going through their trash, as a major factor that eroded the relationship. The pattern continued. In 1999, he began dating me, myself and Irene co-star Renee Zellweger. Their relationship felt calmer and more grounded than his previous ones, but it ended by December 2000, with both sides simply wanting different things. Then in 2005, he began a high-profile relationship with Jenny McCarthy, growing close to her son Evan and sharing a public, values-driven partnership, until it ended quietly in 2010 after 5 years, reportedly due to differing attitudes toward public visibility. People who knew Carrey during this period described him as capable of deep warmth and connection, but also prone to suddenly pulling away. Not quite a contradiction, but something more complicated than that. Then, in 2015, his on-and-off relationship with Catriona White ended in tragedy when she died. Carrey described her as gentle and deeply sensitive, and the loss clearly affected him. But the grief didn't stay private. In 2016, her estranged husband and mother filed a lawsuit accusing Carrey of contributing to her death by providing her with drugs despite knowing her struggles. Carrey firmly denied the claims, calling them exploitative, and the case was dismissed in 2018. Off camera, Carrey has continually surprised people by channeling his intensity into unexpected places. Painting became one outlet, starting as informal therapy and evolving into something more deliberate and expressive. By 2018, his artwork had turned overtly political, with portraits of figures like Mark Zuckerberg and Donald Trump. His depiction of Sarah Huckabee Sanders drew the most attention, with reactions split between calling it bold satire and accusing him of going too far. That same willingness to push boundaries, and sometimes retreat from them, showed up elsewhere. He initially signed on for the violent Kick-Ass 2 without hesitation, but after the Sandy Hook school shooting, his perspective shifted, and he publicly distanced himself from promoting the film's violence, a decision that didn't sit well with everyone involved. During his relationship with Jenny McCarthy, Carrey also became associated with anti-vaccine advocacy, questioning vaccine safety and repeating the widely discredited claim linking vaccines to autism, drawing sharp criticism from the scientific community and the public alike. His performance intensity reached its peak while playing Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. Carrey didn't just play the role. He stayed in character both on and off set for the film's entire production, blurring the line between himself and Kaufman to an extreme degree. It's this immersion that led directly to one of the more revealing stories about him, his encounter with Dave Chappelle. More recently, his appearance at the 51st César Film Awards in Paris sparked online speculation. After months of visible change, his appearance led some to claim he'd been replaced by a body double or was wearing prosthetics, a theory fueled by a special effects artist post and amplified by other celebrities questioning what they saw. Event organizers and his representatives ultimately confirmed it was simply Carrey, changed by time. Dave Chappelle never chased Hollywood the way others did. He built his own path on his own terms, but there were still comedians he deeply respected, and Jim Carrey was one of them. So when the chance to meet him came up on the set of Man on the Moon, introduced through Norm Macdonald, it should have been simple. It wasn't, because when Chappelle arrived, Jim Carrey wasn't there, Andy Kaufman was. Carrey wasn't slipping in and out of character between takes. He was fully immersed, voice and mannerisms locked in completely. Even the crew had adapted, calling him Andy, and treating performance as though it had replaced the actual person. Chappelle knew exactly who he was looking at. It was obviously Jim Carrey, but everyone around him was acting as if that wasn't true, and he was expected to play along. The charade stretched across an entire afternoon. Looking back, Chappelle can laugh about it, but the disappointment was real. He'd gone there hoping to meet Jim Carrey, and instead spent hours talking to a character he didn't believe in. That wasn't a one-off moment. It was the whole process. Carrey stayed in character throughout the making of Man on the Moon, later admitting the experience pushed him so far outside himself that, for a time, Jim Carrey as a person barely existed. Director Chris Smith, reflecting on that period, said being around Carrey didn't bring clarity about who he really was. It did the opposite, revealing how little anyone truly understood him beneath the performance. Seen in that light, Chappelle's story isn't just an awkward anecdote. It's a moment where admiration collided with a much stranger reality. Proof that Carrey had gone so deep into a role that, for a while, he didn't fully come back out of it. What's your favorite Jim Carrey movie? Share your thoughts in the comments below.